Introduction. This video is an English language narration of a Polish language video entitled Communist States: What Really Happened? Listen About Anarchism Episode 11 by the Polish anarchist YouTube channel Listen About Anarchism. After the video creator posted the original Polish language video to the r/breadtube and r/anarchism subreddits, I contacted them volunteering to record an English voiceover for their video. Instead, the creator generously sent me a transcript of the video and encouraged me to make an English language version for my own channel. Instead of reproducing the entire video, much of which focuses on the early history of socialism in Russia, I've chosen to narrate the section specifically on Poland in order to bring greater attention to anarchist perspectives on socialism in the Soviet era in Poland. This video covers these topics. 1. 1940s, worker-government conflict. 2. 1950 to 1980, suppression of worker revolutions. 3. 1980s, Solidarność, solidarity. 4. Cold War pseudo-socialism. 5. What is a Marxist-Leninist state? 6. Conclusion. Please note these section titles are my own, not from the original video. Use the timestamps in the video description to navigate the content. From this point, everything I say is a direct quotation of the original video. There will be no personal commentary from me. That belongs in a different video. 1940s, worker-government conflict. As early as in 1944, Polish workers began to establish independent worker councils which organized production at the grassroots level when the state structures of the Polish People's Republic were not yet fully formed. These councils were based on workers' democracy and collective decision-making. The workers themselves elected and dismissed the managers of the plant, supervised their work, decided on wages, regulations, and decided collectively on some aspects of production. It is to these democratic structures that Poland largely owes the rapid reconstruction of its industry immediately after the war. At first, the councils were tolerated by the authorities, mainly because the recently established state bureaucracy wasn't yet able to effectively seize control over them. However, once the state had strengthened its political position, it immediately began repressions and centralization. As early as 1945, the authorities began to forcefully impose managers of their own choice on the plants. This new management was gradually granted increasing privileges. This met with active resistance from the workers, who by the end of 1948 had organized at least 825 strikes. For this, they were subjected to repressions, layoffs, and even arrests. The last grassroots worker cooperative, which was founded in 1948 at the initiative of the anarchist Jan Wolski, was the Workers' Cooperative Portowiec on the Polish coast, which was comprised of 3,000 dock workers. But of course, the authorities could not tolerate socialism in their newly created socialist state. By 1950, all cooperatives were nationalized, and workers' self-management was finally abolished, with a law imposing extreme penalties for, quote, violating socialist labor discipline, end quote. 1950s. Suppression of worker revolutions. As early as 1953, immediately after Stalin's death, the first mass revolt against the Soviet system broke out in East Germany. On June 16, Berlin construction workers went on strike in protest of production quotas being constantly raised by the USSR-controlled puppet government. In a single day, a small protest turned into a mass uprising that spilled over the entire country. Workers demanded lower quotas, free elections, equal wages for women, the possibility of establishing trade unions, the release of political prisoners, and the resignation of the government. The strikers had no leaders. This was a spontaneous protest staged by an oppressed working class. Decisions were made ad hoc at general meetings. some state-owned workplaces were quickly transformed into employee-managed cooperatives. The ruling Unity Party of Germany was not prepared for such a crisis. Its political position had weakened greatly in the preceding months. It wasn't even able to disperse the demonstrating workers from the streets. The police were poorly communicated, and some of them joined the protesters. The USSR couldn't just stand idly in the face of a workers' revolution that threatened to spread to the entire Eastern Bloc. The very next day, it was decided that Red Army units and tanks would be deployed on the streets. The uprising was finally crushed on June 24. An estimated 150 protesters were killed. However, the post-Stalinist thaw continued, and the working class of the Eastern Bloc countries started demanding their rights more and more openly. In June 1956, workers from the Cegielski factory in the Polish city of Poznan, struggling with poor health and safety conditions, low wages, high standards, and the theft of their meager income through unjustly imposed taxes, went on strike and took to the streets. They were soon joined by workers from other plants. The factory strike quickly evolved into a general strike, and soon 100,000 people were marching through the streets, raising slogans such as, quote, "Down with the red bourgeoisie," end quote, and, quote, "We want bread," end quote. Delegates who were sent by the striking workers to present the strikers' demands to the government in Warsaw were arrested, and when the strikers learned of this, they marched to the prison, from which they freed political prisoners, then proceeded to the building of the Department of Security, UB, the PRL's secret police. UB officers started shooting at the unarmed crowd, killing and injuring many people. This further angered the crowd, which started storming the building, erecting barricades, and firing at it with weapons captured from the prison. A real insurrection had begun. The so-called workers' government of Minister Cyrankiewicz, without even attempting to listen to the workers' demands, sent troops and tanks against them. In an unequal fight between the workers armed mainly with stones and Molotov cocktails, and the army equipped with live ammunition and heavy armor, at least 70 civilians were killed and hundreds were injured. A similar fate befell a few months later workers from Hungary, who tried to form worker councils in their workplaces and manage production themselves, as well as free themselves from an authoritarian government. There, a true revolution of the working class took place, culminating in another armed intervention by the brotherly Soviet Union. It is estimated that about 3,000 civilians were killed. Authorities from the so-called socialist countries dealt with the protesting workers bloodily on numerous occasions. In the PRL itself, there are a few well-known examples that you can see on the screen now. Operation Danube, 1968. Pacification of protests on the coast, December 1970. Pacification of the Łódź strikes, 1971. Pacification of the Ursus protests, June 1976. Introduction of martial law, 1981 to 1983. Pacification of the Wujek coal miners' strike, 1981, and many others. If you grew up in Poland, you probably have heard about them many times before, because they are taught in history lessons and constantly covered by the media. The thing is that the mainstream Polish narrative, based mainly on the reports of the Institute of National Remembrance, IPN, which is filled to brim with right-wing a-holes, distorts the nature of these protests. The right-wing media love to present these events as a conflict between God-fearing Polish patriots who wanted to reintroduce capitalism and to make Poland great and Catholic again, and the evil Russian invaders and their henchmen who forcibly introduced some unwanted socialist system. In reality, these were class conflicts between the working class, which wanted real socialism, that is, workers' control over the means of production, respect for workers' rights, and better welfare, and the ruling class, which wanted to maintain its power and privileges, just like capitalists. 1980s. Solidarność, solidarity. This was evident at a glance even in the early years of the Solidarity Labour Union, NSZZ, Solidarność, Independent Self-Governing Trade Union, Solidarity, whose rank-and-file members began to establish federated working councils in their workplaces as early as in 1980. The union's top brass were not enthusiastic toward this idea. Lech Wałęsa, the main leader of Solidarity, later Poland's president, announced in November of that year, quote, "We are not trying to take over management. That's what experts are for," end quote. The electrician and his surroundings, however, caved under the pressure of rank-and-file members, and in July 1981, the Federation of Workplace Organizations of the Independent Self-Governing Trade Union, Solidarity, was established. And in September, the National Congress of Solidarity delegates unambiguously supported the socialization of economic planning and making worker-run enterprises the basic organizational units of the economy. In response, on September 25, 1981, the authorities tried to introduce a compromise bill on workers' self-management, but this was met with resistance from the increasingly radical Solidarity, which wanted the full democratization of workplaces. The Unionists demanded a nationwide referendum on the matter, to which the PZPR, the Polish People's Republic ruling Marxist-Leninist party, accused them of, quote, anarcho-syndicalism, end quote, perhaps not incorrectly. On December 13, 1981, martial law was introduced and Solidarity was made illegal, which finally ruined any chances for worker self-management. After the union was legalized again, its management began to make deals with the authorities, which sought to transform the country's economy into free market capitalism, seeing it as an opportunity to maintain their position and enrich the ruling elite. Some speculate that martial law may have been intentionally declared to destroy any attempts of building grassroots worker self-management and facilitate the introduction of private property. Cold War pseudo-socialism. After 1989, under pressure from the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, Poland began a shock treatment of its economy, quickly privatizing everything and driving millions of citizens into extreme poverty and unemployment. Virtually all state systems that call themselves socialist or communist end in a similar way. China was transformed into a neoliberal capitalist dictatorship with a red coat of paint in the early 1980s. In Russia, the collapse of the USSR created a class of extremely wealthy oligarchs, most of which were former communist bureaucrats that had enriched themselves through re-privatization. Currently, even such strongholds of modern state capitalism as Cuba or North Korea are opening up to the free market. This proves that the state can never successfully introduce socialism or communism, and that sooner or later, usually sooner, it will degenerate and collapse, and the so-called workers' state will always end up turning on the workers and will become just a carbon copy of the capitalist class. Since these states so clearly deviated from the basic tenets of socialism, why are they so widely called socialist? For themselves, as I have already described in the case of the USSR, it was excellent for propaganda, aimed at utilizing the energy of grassroots labor movements and building their own power on it. Their ostensible concern for the interests of the working class also helped them gain support among leftists from traditionally capitalist countries, which allowed the Eastern Bloc states to manipulate local policy in accordance with their interests. Powers such as the USSR and China often financed and helped to organize Marxist-Leninist parties and guerrillas to cause political upheaval and expand their sphere of influence. For the free market capitalist states, on the other hand, labeling Eastern Bloc countries as socialist or communist is also very profitable. To portray any movements that advocate socialism or even social democracy as wanting a bloody dictatorship is an excellent tactic for discrediting them in the public eye. In Poland, this phenomenon has grown to such ridiculous extremes that even the ruling far-right Law and Justice Party, PiS, is described by liberals and conservatives who stand even further to the right of it as socialist because it introduces the bare minimum of social security measures which have been present in Western countries for decades. Not to mention moderate social democrat parties like Together, Razem, which are regularly called communist by the mainstream media, even though they advocate private property and a free market. For the Polish political scene, where the Overton window is shifted far to the right, every person who advocates even in the slightest in favor of social equality is a supporter of Bolshevism. This situation is similar to the one in the USA, in which the center-left reformist Bernie Sanders is portrayed as a radical communist who wants to nationalize those poor, oppressed mega-corporations by gently raising their taxes. Such a portrayal of socialism is also very handy for capitalists. Trade unions, especially the more radical ones, are often accused of having Bolshevik sympathies. Who cares that they often represent anarcho-syndicalist tendencies, which always ideologically and militarily opposed the Bolsheviks? This makes it easier to slander them, and thus makes strike-breaking easier by undermining any potential solidarity from non-union workers and the rest of society. What is a Marxist-Leninist state? So what should we call states based on the ideology of Marxist-Leninism? It's a difficult question. Most of the anti-Bolshevik left and anarchists use a term that emphasizes the real nature of this system: state capitalism. However, this name could be confusing to people unfamiliar with the topic, so in discussions with them, one can also use simplified terms such as state communism or authoritarian communism. I know that these terms slightly distort reality because communism is, by definition, a stateless society which doesn't have much in common with the single-party dictatorship, but at least they put them firmly in opposition to libertarian communism or anarcho-communism. Finally, for the sake of balance, I would like to add that I'm not trying to play the role of the IPN, Institute of National Remembrance, and demonize every aspect of these systems, because it would simply be unfair. Like I said at the beginning, nothing is black and white, and there are many examples of great achievements of Marxism-Leninism, especially compared to the systems it replaced. For example, Poland, which was an extremely underdeveloped and backwards country during the Second Polish Republic, in which peasants and workers had to deal with extreme poverty, exploitation and social inequalities, inhumane living and working conditions, famine and discrimination. The Polish People's Republic, PRL, brought undeniable improvements in the fields of social security, women's empowerment, access to healthcare, education, housing, and food. Nor could I fail to mention the achievements of other Marxist-Leninist revolutions, such as Cuba, Vietnam, or Burkina Faso, especially compared to the capitalist regimes that preceded them. The latter deserves particular praise. Within 4 years, from 1983 to 1987, under the leadership of Thomas Sankara, the extremely underdeveloped former French colony managed to make a giant leap forward. The land, concentrated in the hands of tribal chiefs, was given to the peasants who worked on it, thanks to which it was possible to make the country independent from Western food aid. Public education and mass vaccination programs were introduced. Women were made fully equal under the law. However, I must mention that there were cases of human rights violations and strikes being broken, although it was an incomparably small phenomenon than before the revolution. On November 15, 1987, Thomas Sankara was assassinated in a military coup. Immediately after the Pushists took power, all progressive reforms were reversed. The land was given back to its former owners and relations with France were restored. Burkina Faso returned to the sphere of influence of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. Conclusion. The conclusion I am striving for in this video is this: it is impossible to have a revolution and not abolish the state. State power always protects itself first of all, no matter whether it calls itself popular or working class. This has been empirically proven countless times in history, and frankly, I cannot understand people on the left who say that state communism should make a comeback. I think that these people are more often driven by aesthetics by actual history. because it's hard to disagree that state communism had a really cool audio-visual style. It also seems to me that they have just gone too far in rejecting the mainstream right-wing historical narrative. Due to the need to constantly refute thousands of right-wing lies, they also seem to have forgotten to critically examine the real historical facts mixed in with the fabrications. Because even a broken clock is right twice a day. Finally, I'd like to thank my generous patrons, Dusty Bob, The Boots Are On, Elias Asvig, Duran Barnett, Alexander Curzon, Shawn A. Young, Andy Chaos, TBLTP, Thors, Fake Name, Niels Rethelin, Judge Sabo, Matthew Simmerall, Martin T., Ben Lindquist, John Larkin, Jack C., Ezekiel Stacy, Love You More, Noah French, and Aaron Johnson. Please contact me if I ever pronounce your name incorrectly.